Um, as we know that the average life expectancy is higher in women than in men. So what might have causes these gender differences in lifespan? So is it the same in the animal world?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. This is one of the features of human biology that's relatively unique, which is that women live longer than men under virtually every circumstance we can imagine. When times are good and everybody's living a long time, women live longer. When times are bad and there's sickness and famine, women live longer. They live longer when they're babies. They survive better when they're babies. They survive better when they're 90-year-olds. And we have no idea why. Now, in the animal world, it's not uncommon for males to live longer. It depends on the species and it depends on the circumstances. For instance, one of the animals, that group of animals I think is really interesting are bats. And in the longest lived bats that we know, all the long-lived individuals are males. And we don't know why that is. We don't know if it's environmental or if it's genetic or if it's some combination of those things. Because one of the things about studying animals in the wild is you're not just studying, you're studying how their physiology plays out on what they have to do to survive in the wild. One of the things that female bats do is they have the largest babies of any mammal relative to their body size. They have to provide for them when they're pregnant and when they're after they're born. They have to provide for them, and that's a very draining amount of energy, whereas males just go out and eat and come back. And so it might be something that simple in the bats. But there's enough variability in the animal kingdom where males live longer in some species and females live longer that I think we could probably learn quite a bit about human aging if we understood that. There's actually a twist on the sex differences that's also quite interesting, which is that even though women live longer, very reliably, also very reliably, they're in worse health later in life. They have more aches and pains, they go to the doctor more, they take more medications, and we don't really understand that either. It almost doesn't make sense if you think how robust they are in bad times otherwise. So what I like to say is if we could make men live as long as women, and we could keep women healthy as long as men, then we would do a great deal for human health, just by accomplishing. Yeah, yeah.
And well, based on your research on longevity animal, would say that there are animals that could live forever, or according to our knowledge until now, what are the most long-lived animals?
Well, there are a handful of animals that seem to be potentially immortal. And I say potentially because nothing is. You know, that if you live long enough, you're going to have an accident of some sort. If you're a person, you're going to walk out in front of a bus or somebody's going to drop something off of the top of a building on your head, something. And the same is true of animals. But there are some animals that, as far as we know, they don't seem to age. Now, there are some animals that age very slowly. I'll take the case of a tortoise. Tortoises live a long time. They age very slowly, but they do age. The old ones they get cancer, they get cataracts, they get heart problems, they get all of the problems. It just takes them a very, very long time. But there are some simple animals, and I'm thinking now of hydra, little tiny freshwater polyps that look like sea anemones. And as far as we can tell, so the way that they reproduce, in the laboratory at least, is that a new hydra grows out of their side, and eventually it detaches, becomes an independent hydra. And for as long as anybody has had the patience to study them in the laboratory, which is about 7 years, They don't show any increase in death rate. They don't show any decrease in reproductive rate. There are various subtle ways that we can assess their health, how efficient they are at catching prey, for instance. That doesn't seem to change. And so there's something that we could seriously learn from them. Now, they're interesting organisms in that they have a thin sort of band of stem cells around their middle. And except for those cells, every other cell in their body is fairly young. Those stem cells reproduce and then they migrate either to the end to the base or off to the tentacles, and then they're shed into the environment. So no cell in a hydra, except for the stem cells, is older than about 3 weeks. Yet they go on and on and on. And so I think where the real lesson is to be gained from them is by understanding how those stem cells survive so well. Now, I have to say that I've just made this claim that they're potentially immortal, but we really don't know that because, like I say, the longest we followed in individuals is about 7 years. And for an animal that small, that reproduces that fast, 7 years is a very, very, very long time. So we're assuming that it would just continue to do that for decade after decade after decade. But we don't know that for sure. So it is possible that at some point those stem cells would get damaged and start to become exhausted. They certainly grew a tremendous number of divisions without doing that. So as far as we know, that's an animal that doesn't age. That's as close as we have to knowing that an animal doesn't age. It's a very, very rare thing in nature.
Then
but it's very important. Yeah, so I mean, it's very important because if an animal ages slowly, it means it's getting old. It's just getting old slowly. If it's not aging at all, it means it's staying young forever. Yeah. And that's kind of, that's kind of the, what we would most like. I don't think that's achievable in people, but it's certainly a goal that's worthy of trying.
Then can I draw the conclusion that to the animals, the slower they grow, the longer they live?
Yes, there is a trend. So things like tortoises, it might take them 30 years to become an adult. I study some clams that live in the ocean. It might take them 50 years to become an adult. Greenland shark, which may live as long as 400 years, takes them 150 years to even become reproductively mature. And that is very, very strange. That would be a very, very painful adolescence that lasts a century or more.
Before they become reproductively mature, how lovely their life will be.
Right, and but they're very, very, very slow. And I don't think most people realize, they think of sharks as being fast. Greenland sharks live in very cold water. They live in water that's very close to freezing. And they move they actually move more slowly than most 80-year-old people walk. So that's very, very slow indeed.
Then I'm curious about that. Is there any interesting or impressive thing that happened during your field investigation?
Oh, many, 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 many things. One thing I got from my taxi driving years. So one of the things that people start to lose as they get older, one of the first things to go is their spatial memory. People kind of get confused. Where did I leave my car? That sort of thing. One of the things that I got from my taxi driving and my field biology experience, I think, is that I have a really good sense of direction. I can drive through your city and come back 10 years later and remember how I got around in the city. That's something that I attribute to my field experience and also my experience driving taxis, where I had to remember how to get people there. In terms of adventures, yes, I mean, I've stepped on crocodiles. I've had snakes drop on me out of the ceiling of the house. I've had my share of adventures. I've had rattlesnakes going in front of me and behind me at the same time.
Is that poisonous?
Yes. So I've been very lucky. I've never been really seriously injured in the field. Although just when I was dealing with wild animals in captivity, I did once, I have to say, I've just been bragging about my sense of direction. But once when I was working in Papua New Guinea, in a very, very remote area, a week's walk from a little jungle airstrip, I got lost one night when I was out radio tracking an animal, and I waited too late to start heading back to camp. And I got confused about where I was. And rather than just start running around aimlessly and get hopelessly lost, I just stopped. I got under a tree. I thought, I will wait until morning when it's light again and I can see some landmarks. Because this is an area that there were no people in. There were just the people that were in my expedition. There were no people that lived in the area. It turns out, fortunately for me, the people that were in my expedition, the local people, were so good in the forest that they managed to track me in the dark, and they found me about midnight. They found me under the tree. And that gave me a tremendous amount of respect for people who live. You know, we tend to think of them as being primitive because they're not technological, but they know things that we don't. They see the forest in ways that we simply cannot do.
I am both astonished and a little bit thrilling of her stories. So brave you are.
Lucky, I think I'm lucky. I am.
Well, I'm curious about another topic is that we have talked a lot about the calorie restriction. Then when you're speaking of this topic, you seem to put more faith in fasting rather than calorie restriction. Well, is that true? Or
Right.
why do you think that fasting
Yes, it is.
diets?
The difference between intermittent fasting, so fasting for a certain length of time, let's say every day or every few days, is that people can do it. People cannot do calorie restriction the way we do it in mice, except for there are some exceptional people that can, but it's very rare. And we're also not sure that calorie restriction, the way that we do it in rats and mice, would be beneficial for people because it's so hard to translate an animal that gets its food restricted but has no opportunity to move around and it lives in a cage the size of a shoebox, and gets to be very big, very fat compared to an animal in the wild. We don't know if what we're doing is taking an overfed, obese animal, laboratory animal, restricting it until it's at a healthy body weight, and that's why it's living longer, or whether there's something about an animal with a healthy body weight and making it very, very, very lean, and whether that's the effect. And there aren't good data in people because, like I say, most people can't do that. There are short-term studies, and those studies show some health benefits, but they're not getting exceptionally lean like the rats and the mice are. And the health benefits that are seen are also very, very small relative to a healthy person. So my thought is calorie restriction, if people could do it, would probably be very beneficial for people that are overweight or obese. And I don't think it would be that beneficial for people who are already at a healthy body weight. In fact, it might even be detrimental. You know, one of the things that happens is the people that have done this long term, the people in the Calorie Restriction Society, they lose a lot of muscle. And they also lose a lot of weight, but they lose a lot of muscle. And one of the things when people get older is that lacking muscle strength starts to become a problem. You know, they have trouble getting up out of chairs.
Combination of sport.